Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. You know the problem with naming a company after an individual? What do you call it when that person is fired? Case in point, BYUS, named after Baiju Ravindran. He's not been fired yet, but investors want to do it. And India's agencies have issued a lookout notice for him. So how did the poster boy of Indian startups become a cautionary tale? We'll discuss that tonight. In contrast, the story of a company that seems unstoppable. Nvidia has beaten expectations with its earnings and caused stock market rallies across the world. Meanwhile, China is back to Panda diplomacy. We decode the reset with the US, the one that they're attempting. Joe Biden is calling Putin names and making news for tripping again. Somalia is trying to checkmate Ethiopia with a new security pact with Turkey. We'll explain that. In Afghanistan, heritage sites are being bulldozed under the Taliban's watch. In India, a row over players picking IPL over domestic cricket. Why China is one of the most expensive countries to raise a child. Why the young are going to sleep early. And a conversation from the Raisina dialogue featuring the Foreign Minister of India. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. France accuses Russia of threatening its military, says Moscow warned of attacks on French patrol missions in international airspace. This is the latest accusation by Paris against aggressive Russian behavior. France is a major supplier of weapons and aid to Ukraine. Albanian parliament approves a controversial migrant deal with Italy. Under the deal, Albania will host migrants rescued in Italian waters. Rome will pay for the infrastructure and security. The agreement has been slammed by opposition parties in both countries as well as by human rights groups. Campaigning begins for Iran's legislative election. Voting will take place on the 1st of March. The polls are expected to tighten the conservatives' grip on power. This is the first election in Iran since the 2022 protests over Masha Amini's death. The United Kingdom to quit a fossil fuel-friendly treaty. The agreement allows fossil fuel giants to sue governments over their climate policies. France, Germany, Spain and the Netherlands are also exiting this controversial treaty. And former Brazilian footballer Dani Alves sentenced to 4.5 years in jail. A Spanish court found him guilty of raping a woman at a Barcelona nightclub. The incident took place in December 2022. Alves, who testified at his trial, can file an appeal. Has the road run out for BYUS? I don't just mean the company, I mean the man behind it too. Baiju Ravindran. He donned many hats in the last few years. Celebrity founder, rock star CEO and now embattled businessman. He's been trying a lot of things to turn BYUS around, but the investors are not buying it. A group of them has called for an EGM tomorrow. An EGM is an extraordinary general meeting. Corporate laws allow shareholders to call such a meeting. The idea is to discuss urgent issues, hence the extraordinary angle. A couple of questions now. One, who called this meeting? Key investors like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, General Atlantic, Process Ventures and Peak XV. Question number two, why did they call this meeting? To discuss a change in leadership. In simpler words, to remove Baiju Ravindran. Now reports say the investors wanted to rejig the board, Ravindran and his family out, new faces in. Just one problem though, the courts have now stepped in. Once the EGM was announced, Baiju Ravindran moved the Karnataka High Court. He said the investors did not follow the rules and the court agreed. It has granted interim relief to him. So any decision taken at the EGM will be non-binding. Assume the shareholders decide to fire Baiju Ravindran. That decision won't take immediate effect, not until this court case is settled. So he's hanging by a thread. The next court hearing is on the 13th of March. That will give us more clarity on Ravindran's future. But frankly, it doesn't look good. Multiple petitions have been filed against BYUS at the Company Law Tribunal. And what do they want? To begin with, insolvency proceedings. Again, in simpler words, they want to declare that BYUS is bankrupt. The first such petition was heard on the 6th of February. It was filed by a marketing vendor called Surfer Technology. The second was filed by an international lender called Glass Trust Company. And the third by a BPO firm called Teleperformance Business Services. All of them want the same thing: declare BYUS bankrupt, take legal action, and sell off assets to pay the debt. But not everyone is waiting around for that. Some BYUS customers are taking matters into their own hands, like these parents who've gone viral on social media. They wanted a refund for an unused learning program. After weeks of trying, they lost it. They went to the local BYUS office, took down a television installed there, and took it home. You have to see this.
ये वीडियो बना रहा हूँ मैं क्योंकि ये टीवी ले जा रहे हैं, इनका रिफंड जो है अभी तक नहीं हुआ है। नहीं मान रहे, ले जा रहे हैं, ले गए, ये नहीं मान रहे। क्या ठीक है सर, बिल्कुल आप बात कर लीजिएगा एबीएस सर से। ठीक है चलो।
Now, we don't condone this. This is no way of recovering your money. There are legal means for that. But we do understand the emotions here. BYUS used harsh tactics to gain customers. Their employees talked of a toxic culture, like pushing products on parents who could not afford them, or setting unrealistic targets for salespersons, or feeding the fears of students. This fueled the rise of BYUS. But it also left many families broke. So now they want answers, or in this case, a television. But the company's investors have gone past that stage. They don't want answers anymore. They want BYUS Ravindran gone. Even law enforcement agencies are in the loop. Reports say the ED has issued a lookout circular for BYUS Ravindran. Now, the ED is India's Economic Intelligence Agency. The Enforcement Directorate, that's what it's called. It fights financial crimes. And right now, the ED thinks Ravindran is a flight risk. So reports say the Immigration Bureau has been asked to keep an eye out to make sure that he does not leave India. Now, the ED's case is a different one. It concerns violations of foreign exchange rules. And how much money are we talking about? Almost 9,300 crore rupees, that is close to $1 billion. So the walls are closing in on BYUS Ravindran. His investors want him out. His lenders want him declared bankrupt. His customers want their money back, and law enforcement is looking to nail him. It's quite a fall for this company. BYUS was once the poster child of Indian startups. It was valued at $22 billion, but today it's at risk of being sold for parts. Such headlines are not a good look for India. Think of what it says about corporate governance in the country, about company leadership. You have a man who names a company after himself, takes millions from investors, takes wrong decisions, and then tanks the whole thing. It's not just his money that is gone, it's also investors and funds. And BYUS is not alone. We've seen another example, and many other examples, in fact, in India, like the Sony Z fiasco. Again, the issue was poor corporate governance. In Z, the top leadership is accused of siphoning money, the money of investors and shareholders, people who put their hard-earned income in their hands. What message does it send to ordinary Indians looking to invest in the stock market, or foreign investors for that matter? So such issues are not limited to one company. They affect the whole brand. They can erode trust in Indian markets, which is why it's important to course correct, to set the house in order, to review expansion strategies, to scale back nonsensical valuations, and most importantly, to hold people accountable. It's a test for BYUS and India. For our next story, let's go back in time. The year was 1993. Jensen Huang was sitting at a California diner. He had two other people with him. Together, they were starting a new company. They wanted to make a graphics chip, one that would make competitors green with envy. They chose the name Envision. But it was already taken. So Huang suggested another name, Nvidia. It's from the Latin word invidia, which means envy. Now, 30 years later, Nvidia is truly the envy of the world. The company reported its earnings in the fourth quarter. It was over $22 billion, which is 22% higher than the last quarter. When you compare it to last year, revenue is up by 265%. Imagine that, 265% up. Nvidia is already a Wall Street darling. Its stocks have tripled in value since last year. This time, Wall Street had lofty expectations. Nvidia managed to beat that too. And it sent the markets rallying. Nvidia shares jumped 12% in pre-market trade. It caused other tech stocks to soar. Asian markets joined the sentiment. Japan's Nikkei hit a record high. It was for the first time since 1989. Traders in Tokyo even broke out in applause. Europe's stock 600 hit a two-year high. It rose to almost 496 points in early trade. So the mood in the markets is bullish, and it's driven by artificial intelligence. Investors believe AI is the future, and leading that wave is Nvidia. Here's what founder Jensen Huang said, and I'm quoting, "Accelerated computing and generative AI have hit the tipping point. Demand is surging worldwide across companies, industries, and nations." So Huang says AI is at a tipping point. AI systems need millions of powerful chips to run, which means Nvidia will only keep growing. This company is the world's most valuable chip maker. It dominates the market for chips, especially used in artificial intelligence systems. We've all heard of ChatGPT. It was trained on thousands of Nvidia chips. Microsoft, OpenAI, Amazon, Meta, Google, all of them have deals with Nvidia. They're buying chips in bulk. Why? Because it's the only player offering what they want. Nvidia has had a head start in this race. They took a bet years ago at a time when AI was not even the cool thing, and that bet is now paying off. Nvidia became a $1 trillion company. It's America's third most valuable company after Apple and Microsoft. Right now, it is the most traded stock on Wall Street. So what's next for this company? It's planning to ship a new chip called the B100. It is said to be exponentially more powerful and has further raised expectations of many more years of explosive growth. So Nvidia looks set to dominate the market, but it's not like they do not have any challenges. Top on their list are restrictions. The US has restricted the export of high-end AI chips to China. Nvidia is still selling to China, but the numbers have dropped significantly. Then there's supply. The company is scaling at a record pace, yet it is struggling to keep up with the demand. And the third challenge is competition. Nvidia has a target on its back. Everyone wants to make chips now. As of today, their biggest rival is a company called AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, AMD. It has released a new AI chip, one that could challenge Nvidia's dominance. Now guess who runs this company? Lisa Su, who happens to be a cousin of Jensen Huang. I guess they talk chips during family dinners. Meanwhile, OpenAI is toying with this idea. It wants to start its own AI chip venture, and it wants some $7 trillion for that. Intel is investing in this space. It has struck a deal with Microsoft that could be worth billions. Amazon has a custom-built chip for training AI models, so the race is very much on. At this point, the others are trying to catch up. But this is a high-stakes game, and Nvidia will have to work very hard to remain on top of the curve. Here's a teenage quiz for you. How do you know if someone likes you? Maybe quick glances in the classroom or some cheesy one-liners. Well, geopolitics is quite similar. Countries have their own way of saying they like you, their own love language, if you will. And for China, that's panda diplomacy. I'm talking about pandas, these guys, giant pandas. They're the rarest members of the bear family. You can find them only in China. If you see them in zoos abroad, China gifted it to them. It's Beijing's way of reaching out. But in the last few years, panda diplomacy has struggled because China began pulling them out from the US. Zoos in Memphis, Tennessee, and Washington had to return their pandas. And why was that? Again, geopolitics. China-US competition intensified in the last few years, especially after the 2018 trade war. So Beijing took the pandas back. Then why are we talking about them tonight? Because panda diplomacy is making a comeback. China is working to send 2 of them to the San Diego Zoo.
As far as I know, relevant Chinese institutions have already signed agreements with Zoo Madrid in Spain and the San Diego Zoo in the United States on a new round of cooperation in giant panda protection.
Now, this is quite symbolic. A, because China is making a U-turn. Last year, Chinese social media accused the US of mistreating pandas. But 1 year on, Beijing is sending more. And B, because Americans are obsessed with pandas. We saw that in November last year. 2 giant pandas were leaving the Washington Zoo. Their farewell was quite emotional.
Once we heard that they were going back to China, we knew that we had to bring her here to see them.
I'm sad to see them go. Oh, yeah. I want to miss them and I want to hug them.
Who knows if they'll be back?
Now we come to the politics. Pandas have played a key role in the US-China relationship. It dates back to 1972. That's when US President Richard Nixon visited China. He met Mao Zedong, buried the hatchet, and got pandas in return. So in 1972, these bears signaled a reset, a new chapter in US-China relations. Is 2024 going to be the same? Well, yes and no. The relations are a lot better than during the pandemic. Back then, it was daily abuse. They couldn't agree on anything. But in the last few months, we've seen a change. A lot of top US officials traveled to Beijing. Treasury Chief Janet Yellen, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. That set the stage for the big meeting. Xi Jinping visited the US for the first time in 6 years. He also held talks with Joe Biden. Nothing big came out of those conversations, but the idea itself was welcome. Keep talking to each other. I guess the question is, why? Xi Jinping is not about to abandon his global ambitions, nor will the US give up its position. So why are they taking a step back? A couple of reasons. Number one, financial stress. China's economy has had a bad couple of years. Growth is sluggish, youth unemployment is high, and investor confidence is low. So Beijing needs time to build things back. The US too struggled financially. Their inflation reached a 40-year high in 2022. So Joe Biden needed a breather. He was already dealing with a war in Ukraine. The last thing he wanted was a conflict in Asia. Reason number two, a number of close calls. The first one was in January last year. A Chinese spy balloon was spotted over American skies. The US eventually shot it down. The second was in June. A Chinese warship cut across an American destroyer. It was a dangerous and risky maneuver. The third incident was in October. A Chinese fighter jet flew very close to a US bomber. Again, a risky maneuver. So both sides asked the same question. What if these close calls escalate into something more? What if there is miscommunication? It would be deadly for both sides. And finally, number three, self-interest. The US and China are deeply interconnected. Their economies, their industrial base, their markets, everything is closely linked. So clean divorce would be ugly for both sides, which is why the US won't decouple from China. They will only de-risk. It's all about self-interest.
I think we brought greater stability to the relationship, not moving away from or ignoring the fact that, yes, we have a competition. There are areas where we are contesting each other, but there are also areas where we can and should cooperate because it's in our interest to do that.
China will firmly safeguard its legitimate rights and interests and act in a sense of responsibility for the history, for the people and for the world to work with the US side to implement the common understandings between the two presidents and move the bilateral relations forward along the right path of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation.
In the short term, this is good. We're talking about two of the biggest economies in the world, also the two biggest militaries. So we need them to work together. But what about the long term? I wouldn't bet on it. The US is still focused on containing China in the South China Sea, and Beijing is still intent on poking American allies, on land grabs and expansionism. These differences may never disappear. For example, the US will soon have 5 aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific. It's an unprecedented deployment. It definitely doesn't signal a backward step from the US. So all this panda diplomacy is about the next best thing, about laying ground rules of engagement, about competing and not fighting. But to do that, you need political maturity, not the strong suit of China or the US. So this reset is on shaky ground. There could be a US-China reset, but there's no love lost between America and Russia. On Wednesday, Joe Biden called Putin a crazy SOB. Yes, those were the words used by the US president. Putin has not replied to this barb, but the Kremlin has. It called Biden's comments a huge disgrace. Russia accused Biden of trying to act like a Hollywood cowboy. This isn't the first time Biden has cursed Putin. He's called him a pure thug, a war criminal, a butcher. But even by those standards, this one was harsh. So what explains Biden's verbal outburst? Is he sharpening his attack for the election year? Our next report tells you.
On Wednesday, Joe Biden was at San Francisco. He was attending a fundraiser. Biden started talking about climate, but he soon changed tune. He talked about Putin. Here's what he said. We have a crazy SOB like Putin and others, and we always have to worry about nuclear conflict. But the existential threat to humanity is climate. Doesn't sound very presidential, but those were Biden's words. The theme was simple. Climate is a threat, but Putin is a crazy SOB. Of course, no one expected him to heap praises on the Russian president. He's called him a thug before. He's called him a war criminal. But SOB may be pushing it. Not that Biden hasn't said it before. In January 2022, he was caught on a hot mic. He used the same term of abuse for a reporter.
Will you take questions on inflation then?
Let's move. Thank you. Thank you
all. Do you think
inflation
is a political liability?
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a...
So what did Putin have to say about this? It was just days ago that he said he preferred Biden over Trump. So I'm sure he wasn't expecting SOB in return. But the Russian president is yet to reply. However, the Kremlin has. They've accused Biden of trying to act like a Hollywood cowboy.
The use of such language against the head of another state by the President of the United States is unlikely to infringe our president, President Putin. But probably it debases those who use such vocabulary. It may seem as an attempt to appear as a cowboy from Hollywood, but frankly speaking, I do not think it is possible.
World leaders abusing is often funny. But was this part of Biden's script? Is it part of his election campaign? Donald Trump has long been accused of being soft on Russia and Putin. Biden promised to change that when he was elected. And he did. There's no love lost between him and Putin. But abusing takes it to a whole new level. But Putin isn't the only enemy Biden has. You see these stairs? That's his arch nemesis. And he was caught stumbling on it once again. Those are the stairs to Air Force One, his presidential plane. He has stumbled on them, he has fallen on them. He's gripped the handle tight just to avoid another tumble. He's even swapped the long stairs for the shorter one, entering the plane at a lower deck. But none of that seems to have helped. He's still stumbling. The US president is 81 years old. He will turn 82 just 2 weeks after the election this year. Most Americans think he's too old to serve. Many believe he should step down. Biden's campaign is trying to change that. They're trying to show that he's capable and agile enough to serve another term. Explains the hard-hitting attacks on his political enemies. But the one thing that he keeps faltering at the most are the humble stares.
Leaders abusing each other does sound funny, but it's also a sign of our times. Political discourse has fallen to a new low. Trust in the global system is eroding, and the so-called Western way is being challenged. Most countries agree that the current system has to change, yet questions remain. Who should lead that change? What will that change look like, and how can we accommodate the many truths of our world? That was one of the topics for discussion at the Rise in Our Dialogue today. It's India's premier diplomatic gathering. Its 9th edition kicked off in New Delhi on Wednesday. Today, I got a chance to interact with a panel of speakers, including India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. Here's an excerpt. Would you say that let's reform the current system or let's build a new one altogether? And if we were to build a new one, whose ideas and values would shape this new system?
Well, I think the word broken may be too strong. It's like, the battery's discharge. It's running on very low energy. But It's also, I think, you need a different framework in a way. So you'll have to take the bits which work, and you know, I wouldn't completely reject what we have, but obviously there's a very strong case for a very radical change. And we need a radical change because, I mean, look, it's a common sense proposition. If you take the UN, when the UN was invented, it had at least about approximately 50 members. We have 4 times the members. So it's a common sense proposition. You know, the West, as the dominant force earlier, is largely responsible for what, you know, where we are today. But I think the new players haven't helped. I mean, again, if you take UN Security Council reform, the biggest opposer is not a Western country.
Anwar Gargash, where does the UAE and West Asia fit in the current global system? Financially, you resemble Western countries in terms of per capita GDP and etc. But based on history and shared experience, one would say you're closer to the global south. So let's hear it from you. Where do you see yourself?
We have a foot here and a foot there. I mean, we are on the one hand a country that has various interest and political investment in the rise of the global south. But at the same time, we also don't look like the global south in terms of our economy and in terms of our socio-economic environment. But definitely we have an interest. Now, as a smaller state here, we are also concerned very much that we are, you know, that the global system, countries that are our size, will fall within the cracks.
Often also a tendency to look at Africa as a monolith, as against 50 or more than 50 different independent, proud countries with possibly some common challenges, but also some unique challenges. So do you think that this approach that we have right now does not take into account the cultural differences and the histories of various African nations?
Yes, and obviously that's a challenge, and Africa is a very diverse continent. As we, of course, pursue unity as a continent, so it's okay for us to be viewed as an entity that wants to be stronger and powerful and have a voice as a continent. But I think that the broad brush about the condition and the engagement sometimes is not helpful. Is it okay for 54 African heads of states to be summoned in one capital by one leader to be read about the plan of that country and take pictures and leave? Depends on what is the nature of the partnership with that particular country and the work and the history that has gone into putting that initiative together. So there's a bit of resentment now and a bit of rethinking about Africa's partnership with the rest of the world. Just, equitable future has to start with acknowledgement of the structural asymmetry and historic injustices that has led to a condition that Africa finds itself.
There's also confusion on what these Western/universal values are anymore, because in your own country you have a prime ministerial frontrunner who's saying some very disruptive things about not taking in Ukrainian refugees and not giving aid to Ukraine, or for instance, in the US you have a Donald Trump who's talking about unilaterally abandoning multilateral commitments. Does this frayed national consensus in some of the Western powers impact international institutions as well? And then why should global South countries trust the West?
Ooh, putting me on the spot. It's also about humanity. If we look at the people in our country, we want the best for them. And the only way we can do that in these times is to work together. Let me use a really small example. I'm convinced that the European Union and the Indo-Pacific are interconnected. If there's not security in the Indo-Pacific, or not, there's an economy is decreasing, it will affect the European Union.
Our next story is from the Horn of Africa, from Somalia, where President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has made a strategic play. A deal with Turkey. The Somali government has approved a maritime security pact with Turkey. Turkey has been authorized to build up, train and equip the Somali Navy, and it's not just that. They will also defend Somalia's territorial waters. That's what reports say. Do you know what that means? Turkish warships could be patrolling Somalia's coast. They could be active in the Indian Ocean for the duration of 10 years. But why did Somalia pick Turkey of all? Why does it want this partnership? For many reasons. Somalia has been dealing with a terror insurgency for almost 2 decades. Recently, there's been a rise in piracy along the Somali coast. And of course, there's the chaos in the Red Sea, with the Yemen-based Houthis disrupting global trade. All these are important reasons. But Somalia's primary target is different. Listen to this.
With this pact, Turkey will protect the Somali coast from pirates, terrorists, anyone that violates our maritime borders, like Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, Somalia's neighbor and nemesis. The maritime deal is aimed at countering Ethiopia and stopping it from executing its port plan. What is that? We've discussed it on the show, but in case you missed it, here's a quick recap. Ethiopia is landlocked. They don't have access to a port. But their Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wants it. He believes that a port is essential for Ethiopia's growth. So on the 1st of January this year, Ethiopia struck a deal with Somaliland. It was a port deal. Somaliland is going to provide port access to Ethiopia and allow Ethiopia to use its coast to build a navy. One small problem though. Somaliland is not officially an independent nation. It is considered a breakaway part of Somalia by the entire international community, meaning no country in the world has recognized Somaliland. None. It tried to separate from Somalia in 1991, and since then it has been de facto independent, but no one recognizes Somaliland as an independent nation. To the world, Somaliland is a part of Somalia. And that is why there are tensions, because Ethiopia is now dealing with them like they are an independent nation. Of course, Somalia was outraged by this port deal, also because it won't end there. Reports say Ethiopia could officially recognize Somaliland's independence. And Mogadishu will never allow this. It wants Ethiopia to rescind the offer, and that's where Turkey comes in. The new maritime deal could help Somalia.
The Ethiopian government has violated the sovereignty, integrity and the union of Somalia by engaging in illegal agreements with parts of Somalia without legal basis. Therefore, the Somali president made efforts to convince Ethiopia to respect the Somali territorial independence and unity as a neighbor and retract its decision.
As he said, the deal could convince Ethiopia to back down. After all, would Abiy Ahmed dare to take on the Turkish Navy? Remember, Turkey is a NATO member. An attack on one member is an attack on all of NATO. So Ethiopian aggression is almost out of the question, and this severely limits Abiy Ahmed's options. The maritime deal is a smart move by the Somalian president.
We have been at war with terrorists to liberate our country, and today we will start engaging in another war to defend our maritime areas from the terrorists or those who have violated our lawful rights and the international rule of law, so that we live up to our international duty on this matter.
He said Somalia will start engaging in another war today to live up to its international duty. Now, that may be overblown rhetoric, but the signal is quite clear. He believes that he has cornered Ethiopia, and he is confident that the world is on Somalia's side. The ball is now in Ethiopia's court. Let's see how Abiy Ahmed responds. Now, let's look at Afghanistan. The country is being ruled by the Taliban. They've been in power for more than 2 years now, and they took over after the US withdrew its forces in 2021. One of the first things we were told was that this was a different Taliban, supposedly a softer, social media savvy version. None of it seems true, though. They took control, then proceeded to oppress women and crush resistance, all along expected lines. And something else was also expected, the death of Afghan culture. During their first stint in power back in 2001, the Taliban had destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas, the largest standing Buddha statues in the world. The Taliban blew them up. And now they're said to be ruining Afghan heritage again. Here's a report.
This dry, sandy wasteland is Balkh. It's a part of Afghanistan, located in the north of the country, at the crossroads of Western and Central Asia. Today, it looks like a wasteland, but long ago, Balkh was rich. It was the center of an ancient kingdom, known in the West as Bactria. It was a major stop along the Silk Route, which brought the region its riches. That was a long time ago, though. Today, Balkh is in ruins, dotted with artifacts and monuments. They are all that remain of the region's ancient culture. Afghans have been trying to protect these sites for years.
Historical monuments and sites are our country's identity. They are a great asset for our country. That's why we want to preserve these treasures so we don't lose them. We want to safeguard our historical sites and monuments and repair them so we don't lose them.
But this heritage is at risk. The sites are a hunting ground for looters, and the thieves have been growing bold, bulldozing monuments to scour through the remains. A study is being conducted by the University of Chicago. It uses satellite images to track Afghan heritage sites. The university says hundreds of Bactrian sites are being looted, at a pace of one a week. This has been the trend for years, since 2018, and it continues even now, under the Taliban. At least 37 sites have been looted after the Taliban took over Afghanistan. That brings the total to over 200, and there seems to be no end in sight. The Taliban say they aren't involved. They even claim to have 800 soldiers guarding the ruins. So either the guards are ineffective or they are involved in the looting. And there are incentives for this. Afghanistan's economy has tanked since the Taliban took over. People are looking for ways to make ends meet. And there's a lucrative black market for looted artifacts. Researchers believe anything that is found is smuggled out via Iran and Pakistan. The artifacts then make their way to the West or East Asia, where they are sold to private collectors in illegal auctions, or even make their way to museums. Artifact smuggling is common in war-torn countries. Local warlords do it to raise funds so that they can buy weapons. The Taliban had done this before they took over, and some members may still be doing this for money. But there is another suspect as well, the Islamic State. The Islamic State terror group is trying to expand in Afghanistan. It has regularly attacked the Taliban regime since 2021. Balkh is a province where the Islamic State is active. Last year, they even killed the region's Taliban-appointed governor. So the Islamic State could be looting artifacts to fund their activities. Whatever the case, the bottom line is that Afghan heritage is being looted. It is being smuggled out of the country and sold to rich nations, depriving Afghans of their history and culture.
How do you make it to the Indian cricket team? Depends on who you ask. The older generation of fans will say this. Play cricket, play domestic cricket, grind out the runs or wickets, eventually the call will come. But ask younger fans and you will get a different answer. They may say, learn the big shots, get an IPL contract, dazzle some big crowds, and eventually the call will come. Some of the younger players like the second route, the IPL one. It is shorter, quicker, and more lucrative. But the Indian Cricket Board is not too happy. That's the BCCI, the Board of Control for Cricket in India, BCCI. Their secretary has written to top Indian players, and this is what he said. I'm quoting, some players have begun prioritizing the IPL over domestic cricket, a shift that was not anticipated. Every cricketer aspiring to play for India must prove themselves in domestic cricket. Non-participation in domestic cricket will carry severe implications. So two messages from the BCCI. One, if you want to play for India, play domestic cricket, your Ranji trophies and Vijay Hazare tournaments. That remains the yardstick. And two, if you skip these tournaments, there will be consequences. Now, the BCCI is very serious about that. They said no player tantrums will be tolerated. If you're fit, you must play. No ifs or buts. If you don't follow cricket, this may be confusing. After all, why would cricketers refuse to play on purpose? Isn't that counterproductive? Well, bear with me for a moment. Right now, the Ranji Trophy is underway in India. It's the most prestigious domestic tournament in the country. States and regions compete against each other. The Ranji final ends on the 14th of March. The week after that, the IPL will kick off. The first match is on March 22nd. So just 7 days separate the two events. Now imagine you're a cricketer in India. You played in the Ranji tournament. You picked up an injury there. Chances are 7 days won't be enough to recover. So how will you play the IPL? Well, you can't. You may have to skip the tournament and the payday. So many players are doing the opposite. They're skipping Ranji Trophy to play the IPL to make sure that they're fit and ready. A classic example is Shreyas Iyer. He has opted out of the Ranji Trophy quarterfinals. He told the State Cricket Board that he has back pain. But the top physio disagrees. He says Shreyas Iyer has no fresh injury and is fit to play. So why isn't he taking the field? Well, only he can answer. But Shreyas Iyer is not alone in doing this. Many cricketers have been accused of doing the same, of picking the IPL over Ranji cricket. So we're asking two questions tonight. One, why are they doing it? And two, why is it wrong? To answer the first question, the IPL is a golden ticket. There's more viewership, more colour and pomp, and of course, more income. The average salary in the IPL is 3.3 crore rupees, which is around $450,000. Compare that to domestic cricket. The Ranji Trophy pays up to 60,000 rupees per day. Let's assume you make it to the final. Even then, it's under 26 lakh rupees for Ranji, which is around $31,000. Now you do the math. 400,000 versus 31,000, not to mention the fame and endorsements from the IPL. I know cricket purists won't be happy. For them, domestic cricket is the original. It is the epitome of skill and dedication. But cricketers are also human beings, remember. They have families to care for, bills to pay, and a future to plan. Because that Ranji salary won't come every year. By their late 30s, most players retire. So by then, they need to make money, and a lot of it. Enough to sustain in the long term. So before you judge them, think about that. As for the BCCI's worry, it is understandable. You don't want domestic cricket dying out, so red lines have to be drawn. The trick is to draw that line somewhere in the middle. A balance between the IPL and domestic cricket, maybe scheduling it differently, or investing more in domestic cricket, or paying domestic players more. What doesn't help is online trolling and criticism. These players are not picking money over their country, they're picking livelihood and stability. Now let's talk about the global baby bust. It's a story you can set your watch by. Every few weeks there is a new report or data telling us that birth rate is falling in a country. It is too low to sustain economic growth. Despite the best efforts of governments, it has been hard to reverse. Recently, this demographic doom has been pegged to China. In 2023, its population fell for a second consecutive year. Now, a new report is out. It says China is one of the most expensive countries to raise a child. Cost of childcare is about 6 times its GDP per capita. 6 times. Why is the cost so high in China? How does it compare to other countries? Is childcare cost the reason behind China's falling fertility rate? And what is China trying to do to fix it? Why are they failing to fix it? Our next report tells you.
Having children is expensive, no matter where in the world you live. But if you live in China, the situation is dire. The world's second largest economy also has the second highest cost of childcare, only behind South Korea. Here, an average parent spends about $75,000 to raise a child from birth to age 18. If the child goes to college, as most of them do, because let's face it, this is China we're talking about, then the cost obviously rises. Parents shell out about $95,000 to support a child from birth to a bachelor's degree. If we put this in relative terms, the numbers are shocking. The cost of raising a child until they're 18 is around 6.3 times the per capita GDP in China. Meaning people spend about 6 times their total disposable income on child rearing. Compare this with other nations. It's 4.2 times in Japan, 4.1 times in America, 2.2 times in France and 2.08 times in Australia. All these nations are struggling with the population crisis, so their childcare costs aren't great either. Yet China is the reigning champion among them. And the world runners-up, like we said earlier, South Korea, has the highest cost of child rearing. It is 7.7 times the GDP per capita. Meanwhile, South Korea also has the lowest fertility rate in the world. Do you see the connection here? A high cost of childcare is directly linked to a low birth rate in the nation, which is why the sleeping giant is facing a rude awakening. In 2023, China's population fell for the second consecutive year. The number of births fell to about 9 million. That's half the number from 2016. But the question remains, why is the cost of childcare so high in China? It's mainly due to the cost of education, which is high from the get-go. Preschool services in China are mostly private. Therefore, they charge big bucks. This high cost persists till the child goes to college. The tuition in China may sound cheaper than that in America, but there is a key difference. In many Western countries, a student loan provided by the state is much more common. In China, though, the burden usually lies with the parents. Now, China has brought a number of measures to boost its birth rate. In 2017, it abandoned the decades-old one-child policy. Now, it encourages women to have up to 3 children. The government is throwing money at the problem as well, like giving cash subsidies for more children or discounts on IVF. Policymakers are taking the superstitious route too. This is the lunar year of the dragon. So governments are urging people to have so-called dragon babies. But so far, the government has made little dent. The birth rate is stubbornly falling because China is missing the point. It's not prioritizing childcare costs. If policymakers want a bigger population, they should do more for those who want kids, like cash, tax and housing subsidies, educational reform, and equal maternity and paternity leave. Because as long as China has such high fertility costs, it will continue to be among the countries with the lowest fertility rate.
Our last story tonight is about the 21st hour of the day, 9 p.m. It is like a strong, ever-evolving friendship over a lifetime. 9 o'clock changes in meaning. You find yourself doing many different things. When you're young, 9 p.m. means hitting clubs or leaving a restaurant to catch a late-night movie. But when you have young children, 9 o'clock also comes at you fast, like a tiny window of precious time you can call your own. And irrespective of age, 9 p.m. could even mean a daily dose of Vantage. At least we hope so. But there is one thing you would rarely do at 9 o'clock. Go to bed. And that's shaping up to be the new norm. 9 p.m. is the hot new bedtime, not for middle-aged tired people or rowdy toddlers, but for 20-somethings. Gen Z is going gentle into the good night. According to surveys, more of the Gen Z are going to bed around 9 p.m. For millennials, it is around 10 p.m. The young are getting almost 10 hours of sleep as well. According to surveys, Gen Z gets about 9 hours and 28 minutes of sleep. This is the average. That's an 8% increase in a decade. But are the young missing out on having fun then? According to reports, that is not the case. They're going out just as much, but in the daylight. In the US, for instance, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. is the new prime time for restaurants. The slot makes up 31% of reservations, up from 19% in 2017. Meanwhile, the proportion of reservations between 6 p.m. and midnight has declined. So businesses are keeping up, bars are experimenting with daytime dance parties. Some restaurants held the New Year's Eve countdown at 8 p.m. so people could get settled in bed by 11 p.m. Sleeping in early is also making time at home more appealing. In India, for instance, 53% Gen Z feel good about staying home. 43% feel it is their favorite place to be. Now, brands are tapping into that. Furniture moguls in India say that they're targeting a younger audience. So how did this shift come about? Well, there are 3 main reasons. First, the pandemic. It contributed with work from home. The young did not go out that much, and they took control of their shut-eye. The second big shift came after the pandemic, with the rise of the gig economy. According to global surveys, 40% of Gen Z workers hold 2 jobs, meaning they have a 9-to-5 job, but before that they have another one, an additional gig, which they try to finish from 5 to 9. So they sleep earlier and get work done early in the morning. But experts say the third reason is the biggest. Gen Z thrives on trends, and now sleep has become a wellness trend. There is a strong link between sleep and health. There is more research than ever to prove this. Experts say insufficient sleep is a global health epidemic. 62% adults do not get enough sleep, with sleep averaging at just 6.8 hours a day. But Gen Z want to change that. They're well informed about the importance of sleep, so they are pushing themselves to sleep early. But there's a flip side here. You see, sleep is a passive process, much like breathing, digesting food, or growing a beard. You have as much control over sleep as you do over breathing. So, to a large degree, when and how much you sleep is governed by genetics, which is why some people are morning larks and others are night owls. People have a natural biological clock. It differs from person to person and it changes with age. Generally, 10-year-olds want to go to bed late, 20-year-olds even later. But by the time people hit their 50s or 60s, they want to go to bed much earlier. Plus, adequate amount of sleep also depends on people. There is no particular number. For some, 7 hours of sleep is enough. Others need 10 hours. So understanding the importance of sleep or prioritizing sleep is good. But forcing yourself to sleep at 9 p.m. feels like manufacturing a jet lag. You're better off sleeping on this sleep trend. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In India, cricketing legend Sachin Tendulkar was spotted playing cricket in Kashmir's Gulmarg with the locals. In Australia, thousands are ordered to evacuate as bushfires burn in the country's south. And in Los Angeles, firefighters rescue a horse trapped in a sinkhole. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1980, Israel introduced a new currency, the shekel, replacing the pound. It replaced the Israeli pound. The shekel was introduced after multiple requests to have a Hebrew name for the Jewish state's currency. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Oh. I'm bloody real worried. Yeah, I can't think. I'm just sort of, yeah, I've got that real sick in my tummy.
Time for a bath.
As the world feels the shock of wars, India stands as a beacon of strength. The Firstpost Defence Summit 2024 will showcase cutting-edge technologies, forging partnerships between industry, academia and research organizations. Witness the transformative story of India's defence sector. Firstpost Defence Summit 2024.